So, it's just about time for Christmas, or so it seems. Yes, instead of talking about the usual Christmas specials, or in my case, in the last 2 years, something else, I'm going to be talking about the episodes of Doctor Who in the classic era that landed between the days of December the 24th and January the 1st. By the way, these are not the episodes that aired on Christmas Day, but I will mention those episodes that I'm talking about, if it was before one or after one, to know the full context. By the way, the idea of this video came from the 2011 Doctor Who magazine article, The Watcher's Guide for Christmas, from issue 442. I just wanted to credit the original writer for that, as this video would not be possible without that article. So, without further ado, let's do this. With Doctor Who's origins set for November 1963, it was rather inevitable that the show would be around for the Christmas period. Now, had I included December 21st in my days that I was counting for this video, episode 1 would have fitted here, but instead you'd have to do the same for episode 3, because had I allowed January the 4th. But we have episode 2, and unfortunately this doesn't feel like a Christmas episode, so to say, as this one is also the episode where Ian gets incapacitated by the Daleks, and the characters spend an episode in the cell by the end. The characters all seem a bit spent out from what they've had to do throughout the episode, so it's not really an episode that I would recommend for Christmas viewing. As Doctor Who became now solidified in the schedules, it was rather inevitable that the show would hit the Christmas period again, and it did. Now again, if I had included the days after New Year, the first episode of The Rescue would have been included, as it was broadcast on January the 2nd. But I think it was best here to keep it just to this one episode only. Unlike the previous year's entry, this episode feels like one of those adventure-style Boxing Day movies that you put on to sit back and relax. Especially with this one being with all the action that happens. It's something that you can also enjoy, but also you have the heartbreak that is missing with those movies where the Doctor leaves Susan to make a new life with her, with Dave as one of the survivors. It's really an array of emotions that sometimes only Doctor Who itself can pull off, and I definitely recommend this for Christmas viewing. Also, for another recommendation for Christmas viewing, which also includes this sort of episode, I'd also include the film with Bernard Cribbins in it, just because of Bernard Cribbins. With Doctor Who's third season up and ready, this of course would be the point where the Christmas would coincide with Doctor Who, and this year it would be quite different. Instead of missing it by a day or so, Doctor Who would eventually broadcast one of its episodes on Christmas and New Year's respectively. Unfortunately, I feel like the Christmas Day episode of The Feast of Stephen is usually talked about enough to death, so instead I will be tackling the next week's episode, Volcano, which was broadcast on New Year's Day 1966. This episode sadly goes back to being more of a plot-driven story, unlike the last episode, which was a bit of a one-off. And for a story that's been all over the place so far, coming back to it with some elements where the Daleks are involved, and then going to others where the Doctor messes around with a cricket match, and then decides to go to see the celebrations, just doesn't mesh together. It feels like some of the leftovers of the last episode and others just together. I probably wouldn't recommend this episode for Christmas viewing, but I would for The Feast of Stephen. 4 years running and Doctor Who was still strong in the 60s, but in October William Hartnell changed into Patrick Trout, which means the Christmas period of 1966 was going to be the make or break part for this new Doctor. Would the audience continue to watch him during Christmas? These two episodes thankfully had the advantage of being part of a historical story instead of a Dalek one, so they're allowed to take themselves a little bit less seriously. Which in both episodes there are a lot of moments that do tread to loony situations, especially with Patrick Troughton as he acts himself up with some slapstick and dresses up as a washerwoman. But however, I would not recommend these as Christmas viewing episodes due to these episodes striking out to the overall story, which is trying to take itself more seriously, but again, this could depend on personal taste, and to mine, I'd probably say no. With Patrick being secured as a success by the general public, it was safe to know that Season 5 would be around the corner, and of course, per usual, who would grace the screens of the Christmas period. Unfortunately, this episode really doesn't take into the fact of it being doing anything over Christmas, and it just feels like the first one I discussed, where it's more of a normal episode broadcast over the Christmas period. But to be honest, it doesn't feel disappointing, as this is my favourite Troughton story. And I guess for a tenuous link to Christmas, you could say the Doctor disguises himself as Salamander, which could be like part of a Christmas party game. But apart from that, this really isn't like a Christmas style episode at all. Season 5 was of course the success that the show was already being, so Season 6 was on the cards, and of course, as usual, the show would start before the end of the year and hit the Christmas period, so it seemed like business as usual. Now this one is a one I definitely not recommend for Christmas viewing. It's the first one of a normal based on Just Siege story, and it doesn't really work anything to make it more something that you could watch around Christmas, which even something like The Highlanders did with its comical antics by Patrick Trout, which this episode sadly lacks to provide anything fun for. Strangely, Doctor Who missed Christmas in 1969, but this was due to schedule changes, which gave Doctor Who a shorter broadcast length, and its show itself would start in January and end in the summer rather than the old period. Thanks to this, Doctor Who didn't make any Christmas appearances in 1970 or 1971, but in 1972 this changed with the beginning of Season 9, which coincidentally, the first episode landed on New Year's Day, 1972. I'm in two minds about this one. It's not Christmas or New Year's centric at all. To be honest, it feels more like a Halloween one with all the spooky goings on, but to be honest, it does have a lot of elements like the Terminator or any other time travel stories which could be put on during New Year's, so it depends. I would recommend this, but it would only be if you want to watch something like this on New Year's Day. Weirdly, there was technically two Christmas period episodes in 1972, but this was the beginning of the 10th season, and it also made it the beginning of Who's 10th anniversary. And this one I can definitely say is a great Christmas watch. It feels very much like a late present, as we get the action of Unit, the enjoyment of the regulars, the great reappearances of Patrick Trout and William Hartnell, the latter of which would have his last appearance as the Doctor in this story. So it gives the viewer something to be excited about, which I think is a great Christmas viewing, and hell, even give the future episodes a watch around the same time, because they do have the same quality to them. So, with all the Pertwee seasons, they usually begin at the beginning of the next year, right? Well, not for the last one. Season 11 would actually begin in the middle of December, which meant we got an almost full story before Christmas, and of course, an episode happened to fall around the Christmas period of 1973. Like the last one, I would definitely recommend this one as a great Christmas one. Unlike the action-packed Three Doctors episode, we have more of a comical and great historical episode, with feature star June Brown, Sarah Jane uttering the great line of wanting to murder a cup of tea, battle full of stink bombs as the Doctor uses them against his castle siege. Really, it's family fun and all, just like any comical movie that you can find at the time, just like the Centurions films. By Christmas 1974, Jon Pertwee was gone, unless you count the Big Planet of Spiders repeat omnibus on the 27th of December. Even if you didn't, he was still gone, and we had to wait a very long time, all the way until December the 28th, to see what the new Doctor was going to be like, as Season 12 began during the right old Christmas period of 1974. And this is a little bit of a step backwards compared to the other two episodes, which had more of a Christmas quality to them. But I think this one actually makes it up to that, thanks to two words: Tom Baker. Everything the Doctor does in the story is wildly fun, and it's all thanks to Tom Baker, with a lot of standout moments come from him in this episode. So to be honest, I'd maybe say this is a post-Christmas recommendation at best. So, Doctor Who changed his schedule again from starting in January to starting in August, which meant we'd get Doctor Who at Christmas again, right? Well, not really. For both 1975 and most of 1976, Doctor Who was on a bit of a break during the Christmas period, which meant the season wouldn't restart again until early January. But Season 14 did have one episode on New Year's Day, which would be this one. And I'm not really gonna lie, this isn't really a Christmas episode at all. It's very violent, with a man being dragged off to his death, the talk of false gods, weapons, violence, and the realisation that the Doctor may have messed up a whole civilization because he saved them previously. It's perfect for viewing on its own, as it's a really great story, but as a Christmas watch, I definitely think it wouldn't be a one to put you in the Yuletide mood. Remember when I said Doctor Who took a couple of breaks of the Christmas period? Well, for 1978 it didn't, and so a story actually had another episode in the Christmas period, and lucky for it, this story would actually give the show its biggest ratings for the season with 12.4 million viewers. Unlike the last one, this really isn't a Christmas episode at heart. I mean, it's kind of campy with all the crawl parts, but even then the characters are taking this more seriously than making fun of it, so it really hasn't got that making fun of itself tone. And finally, again, we had two seasons in the show which coincidentally hit this Christmas season, as Season 16 did, by starting to air in September 1979. Unfortunately, due to the strike issues in the supposed to be last story, Sharda, this ended up being the last one, which meant 2 weeks after this, the season ended prematurely. But for this episode, I would have to recommend this one. It's very much a Doctor Who sort of pantomime story, as the Doctor does some silly stuff, TARDIS makes some weird noises, and of course we have the ever so great Soldy played by Graham Cowden, which we all know by reputation. But it's just kind of one of those episodes where you can just happen to see it on Christmas and experience it all at the same time. Yep, 10 years later we finally got a Christmas broadcast episode, and this was because Doctor Who finally shifted itself back into the autumn again after it usually be broadcast during the early part of the year and the spring. But the truth is, season 25 only got to be broadcast during this time because the Olympics took over the summer schedule, which meant Doctor Who had to start later in the year. And it's not really a good Christmas episode. Yeah, this was at the point where the story started getting a lot darker in tone and more concentrated on what it was trying to do to revitalise the show at that point. It's more weird that Dragonfire wasn't a Christmas special with how that story ends up being. But great show, especially with the episode in contention having robots strangling people to death, and a cliffhanger that has one of the patrons as a werewolf. It really doesn't end up being a good Christmas episode to recommend. Maybe more of a Halloween one. And well, after that, I've gone through all 15 or so Christmas broadcast episodes in the classic season, and to be honest, I was glad to find more than one of these episodes which I found actually fitting around the season. I was really expecting just to find the one, but to find more was actually better because it meant that they really wanted to try when it came to having some good entertainment for the viewers around the time, whether it be a light episode and a dark story, or just a story that played around with comedy more than usual. Anyways, have a Merry Christmas / a Happy Holidays, and I'll see you all in the new year. Thank you.
Merry Christmas!